Lewis Hamilton has just signed a shocking deal to return to Mercedes, the team where he made history. But what happens next? Will he see out the season with Ferrari, or make an immediate comeback to Mercedes? Don't miss out. Watch until the end to uncover the full story. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. Lewis Hamilton has once more shaken the very foundation of Formula One, not with a daring wheel-to-wheel battle or a record-breaking qualifying lap, but with a heartfelt, pointed, and transparently emotional message that laid bare a reality far deeper than lap times and podium finishes. In a world that often hides vulnerability behind polished press conferences and tightly scripted interviews, Hamilton chose to speak plainly, using his personal platform to express a decision that marks a defining moment in his already legendary career. He's returning to Mercedes for the 2026 and 2027 seasons, leaving behind the weight, the tension, and the disillusionment that came to define his years in red. There were no flourishes in the announcement, no hype videos or cinematic reveals, just a stark statement against a black screen, composed of 6 words that echoed with meaning beyond their brevity: "Home is where the respect is. I'm coming back." Those words landed like thunder in a paddock used to calculated diplomacy. For some, it was redemption. For others, a revelation. And for Ferrari, where Hamilton had once hoped to cement a legacy, it was a reminder that heritage alone doesn't guarantee harmony. In the following paragraphs of his post, Hamilton painted a detailed picture of his emotional experience at Ferrari, an image that stood in stark contrast to the glamorous marketing campaigns, glossy car launches, and historic symbolism that surrounded his arrival. What was once framed as a dream move to motorsport's most iconic team slowly deteriorated into a daily battle for space, for relevance, and for agency. He explained how, from the outside, the team appeared united, prestigious, and invincible. But from within, it was fragmented, tense, and consumed by internal politics that left little room for individuality. He described how his voice, once so central to strategy and innovation at Mercedes, gradually became background noise at Ferrari. Technical input was acknowledged but rarely implemented. Feedback loops grew narrower. Conversations that once felt collaborative turned cold, mechanical, transactional. Over time, the very qualities that had made Hamilton a dominant force, his obsession with detail, his emotional intelligence, his demand for transparency, were treated as distractions. He didn't just feel sidelined, he felt erased. The pain in his words became even clearer when he recounted the emotional toll of the final months. What he hoped would be a journey of co-creation and mutual elevation became, instead, a test of endurance. He didn't point fingers. He didn't need to. The subtext of exclusion was woven into every line. He expressed how the passion that once defined his race weekends had slowly turned into anxiety, and how the silence in meetings spoke louder than any criticism. There was no open hostility, but the absence of warmth was its own form of rejection. "I kept showing up," he wrote, hoping something would shift. "But the only thing changing was me. I was fading." Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. While he avoided naming specific individuals, those familiar with the inner workings of Ferrari have confirmed that his relationship with team principal Frédéric Vasseur became strained early on. What began as respectful disagreement turned into persistent tension. Hamilton, accustomed to working hand-in-hand with leadership at Mercedes, felt he was being managed instead of collaborated with. His requests for strategic adjustments were often met with vague promises. Team meetings, once energizing, became obligations. Slowly, the realization set in: he wasn't being empowered, he was being contained. He also addressed, albeit indirectly, the increasingly cold relationship with Charles Leclerc. Once a partnership full of potential, it had evolved into something unspoken but undeniably fractured. He didn't accuse Leclerc of anything outright, but he made clear that unity had never truly existed between them. Hamilton hinted at uneven access to technical resources, setup preferences that tilted in the other direction, and a garage atmosphere that grew colder with each passing race. "In a team, you're meant to be working toward the same goal," he said. "But if you're not on the same page, eventually, you stop even reading the same book." Team insiders, speaking anonymously, have since provided further context. Engineers reported that briefings often split into 2 narratives, one for Leclerc, one for Hamilton. A senior technician revealed that requests from Hamilton's side were increasingly routed through additional layers of approval, while Leclerc's suggestions were implemented swiftly. Over time, Hamilton's team felt as if they were operating in a parallel structure, disconnected from the core. Some even described the garage as having two teams in one uniform. The result, Hamilton explained, was a complete erosion of trust, not just between individuals, but between himself and the very organization he had joined with such ambition. The romantic idea of driving for Ferrari, of becoming part of its storied legacy, was crushed under the weight of internal division, selective loyalty, and what he described as a culture more focused on control than on collaboration. He made it clear, he wasn't running from challenge. He was walking away from a system that never truly allowed him to contribute. His decision to return to Mercedes, he wrote, was less about comfort and more about being seen, heard, and believed in. It was about returning to a team that viewed him not as a marketing tool or a PR asset, but as a central figure, someone whose experience, insight, and energy still had the power to shape the future. He referenced the relationships he had built there, the shared vision, and the mutual understanding that went beyond racing results. At Mercedes, he said, he felt connected, not just to the car or the championship goals, but to the people. Sources within Mercedes have since confirmed that the contract includes expanded responsibilities beyond race weekends. Hamilton will play a pivotal role in guiding the team's adaptation to the new 2026 technical regulations. He'll mentor younger drivers. He'll be involved in sustainability initiatives and internal diversity programs. His return isn't just about wins, it's about building something deeper and longer-lasting. It's about influence that extends beyond the cockpit. The implications of this shift are enormous. The entire driver market has been shaken. Sponsors are re-evaluating deals. Teams are quietly scrambling to realign their long-term plans. Media outlets are dissecting every word of Hamilton's post, trying to decode the implications for Ferrari's internal health. So far, Ferrari has remained publicly silent. No farewell post. No tribute. No statement of gratitude. The absence of acknowledgement has only intensified speculation, with many wondering whether the separation was more bitter than anyone had previously imagined. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. Meanwhile, fan response has been overwhelming. Messages of support, solidarity, and celebration have flooded social media. Longtime Hamilton followers are rejoicing at his return to the Silver Arrows. Others express regret that the Ferrari chapter couldn't end differently. Some point to the broader lesson Hamilton's move represents, that no amount of prestige is worth sacrificing self-respect. That legacy isn't just about where you race, but how you're treated while racing. In his final paragraph, Hamilton didn't express resentment. Instead, he expressed clarity. He wrote, "Sometimes you chase a dream so hard, you forget to ask if it still fits who you are. I'm not chasing anymore. I'm choosing. And I'm choosing myself." The racing world now waits. Waits to see how Ferrari responds. Waits to witness the new Hamilton-Mercedes chapter. Waits to feel the ripple effects of a decision that was years in the making. But one thing is no longer in question. Lewis Hamilton isn't stepping back into the past. He's stepping into a future he's actively shaping, on his own terms, with his own voice, and with nothing left to prove to anyone but himself. Would you like this to continue with reactions from George Russell, Toto Wolff, or Ferrari staff? Following the conclusion of the Austrian Grand Prix, a gathering intended for technical evaluation inside the Ferrari motorhome veered into uncomfortable territory. What should have been a structured discussion centered on telemetry readings, tire wear patterns, and aerodynamic feedback instead became a defining moment in the internal unraveling of Ferrari's driver dynamic. As engineers reviewed sector times and strategists cross-referenced GPS overlays, Frederick Vasseur, without preamble, reportedly turned toward Lewis Hamilton and delivered a comment that instantly chilled the atmosphere. "You're not adjusting fast enough. Charles sets the standard now." The statement didn't sound loud, but it reverberated like a siren. It was blunt, perhaps even calculated. It was a public reordering of status, issued in the presence of the very individuals responsible for race execution and car development. To Lewis Hamilton, a driver whose resume spans over a decade and a half of dominance, reinvention, and trailblazing success, it was more than a critique. It was a direct challenge to his value within the very system he was brought in to elevate. He didn't retaliate with volume. He didn't slam a fist on the table or fire back with anger. Instead, his reply was measured, deliberate, and cutting in its restraint. "I didn't join to be a background player," Hamilton said evenly. "I'm not here for someone else's narrative. I'm not your supporting cast. I've been at the center of this sport for nearly 2 decades." His tone wasn't defensive, it was wounded. Leclerc, seated a few feet away, remained statuesque. Arms folded. Expression impassive. His eyes deliberately avoided Hamilton's. And yet, that silence said everything. What happened next was not an explosion but a slow-burning series of consequences that began to infect every corner of the team. Within days, a closed-door conversation was arranged between Hamilton and Vasseur at Ferrari's Central Command in Maranello. It wasn't scheduled for press. No assistants were allowed inside. This was not a media moment, it was an ultimatum disguised as a meeting. Vasseur, adopting a tone stripped of diplomacy, reportedly outlined the organizational direction in explicit terms. "We're building the structure around Charles. He's younger. He represents our strategic trajectory." The words were firm. No ambiguity. No olive branch. Hamilton stood quietly, absorbing every syllable. "You could have told me I was a short-term utility piece before I signed," he said after a prolonged pause. "Had I known I was a placeholder, I wouldn't have worn red." There was no shouting. No raised voices. Just 2 men in a room, with irreconcilable visions of what the future was supposed to be. The conversation ended with Hamilton exiting without a handshake. The air between them wasn't hostile, it was frozen, immovable, final. But the real rupture, the moment the conflict leapt from internal tension to visible fracture, came in the build-up to Silverstone. During a confidential drivers' meeting, held in a private room away from the cameras and journalists, a verbal confrontation erupted between Hamilton and Leclerc. The discussion initially centered on tire strategy from the prior Grand Prix, but it derailed when Hamilton questioned whether Leclerc had manipulated the call that saw Hamilton boxed on a suboptimal lap. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Leclerc, instead of denying or confirming, smirked. It wasn't arrogance, it was control. "The team makes the decisions it believes are right," he said with nonchalance. That sentence, said with polished detachment, snapped something inside Hamilton. He didn't shout. He didn't rise. But his tone changed entirely. "No," he said. "They make choices that benefit you. Don't mistake my stillness for submission." The air inside the room turned heavier. Other drivers shifted uncomfortably. Even the team liaison chose not to step in. This wasn't a technical disagreement. It was a clash between 2 figures who no longer saw each other as colleagues. They were rivals not just on track, but within a system that had clearly made its choice. From that moment forward, there was no more pretense. Hamilton and Leclerc were no longer partners chasing mutual success. They were divided forces operating under the same roof but serving different missions. The garage, once a collective unit, began to fracture in practice. Engineers aligned more closely with their respective drivers. Race briefings were separated. Data wasn't shared openly. The collaborative foundation that every top team relies on began to erode. Hamilton's side of the garage started working in isolation. Requests for modifications were met with delays. Experimental setups, he suggested, were deprioritized. Meanwhile, Leclerc's team enjoyed swift execution, rapid implementation of feedback, and internal momentum. The divide wasn't spoken out loud, but everyone felt it. It wasn't political, it was cultural. One driver was now the embodiment of Ferrari's future. The other, despite his unmatched accolades, was increasingly treated as a relic of the past. Inside the paddock, the whispers began. Sponsors noticed the distance. Journalists observed the body language. Former champions close to the situation began privately expressing disbelief. "I've never seen Lewis look so cornered," one ex-driver reportedly said. "He's still fast, but the environment is suffocating him." And yet Hamilton never lost his composure publicly. In press conferences, he smiled politely. He praised the team. But his eyes told a different story, a story of a man enduring a slow fade from relevance inside an organization he was once told he would help transform. Leclerc, on the other hand, never had to say much. His position was secure, not through domination, but through alignment. Ferrari's future was being shaped in his image, not because he demanded it, but because the system gravitated toward his youth, his familiarity, his permanence. And while he didn't gloat, he didn't interfere either. He didn't try to bridge the gap. He allowed the structure to reward him in silence. The fallout reached its apex during the following race weekends. Even during podium celebrations, Hamilton would peel away early, skipping team photos, offering only brief nods to mechanics. His radio messages grew shorter, his tone clipped. When he crossed the finish line, the messages of "well done" from the pit wall felt rehearsed, automated, devoid of real connection. What once was a dream, the idea of Hamilton in red, rewriting history, had become a cautionary tale. Behind the scenes, his management team reportedly began weighing options. Not necessarily to leave, but to reclaim influence. Hamilton wasn't looking to escape. He was looking to matter. He wanted his voice heard, his legacy protected, and his time at Ferrari to mean something more than a marketing boost. The question wasn't whether he still believed in himself. The question was whether the team ever believed in him at all. His silence in recent weeks hasn't been apathy, it's been control. Every move, every sentence, every glance has been deliberate. He's not shouting because he knows the volume of his legacy doesn't need amplification. He's letting the situation expose itself, letting the system show where its loyalty lies. And while others may be shaping the future around Leclerc, Hamilton is reminding everyone watching that he's not just here to compete, he's here to be remembered. And he will be. It didn't happen with fanfare. There was no dramatic announcement. No sudden outburst. No visible declaration. It began quietly, internally, a flicker of realization that turned into a growing blaze. Lewis Hamilton, a man long revered as the architect of modern dominance in Formula One, came to understand, with growing clarity, that his time with Ferrari was no longer about destiny, it was about endurance. A partnership that once promised legacy had mutated into a daily test of patience, pride, and perseverance. From the outside, everything still looked intact. He still walked through the paddock in red, still climbed into the cockpit with poise, still delivered moments of brilliance on circuits that had shaped his legend. But beneath that composed surface, a storm had been gathering, subtle, persistent, and emotionally draining. He had come to Maranello believing he would be welcomed as a beacon, a catalyst for resurgence. But over time, the admiration faded into formality, and respect into obligation. He noticed it in the way voices softened when he entered a room, in how meetings were held without him, in the passive nods he received when raising concerns, suggestions, or strategic alternatives. He wasn't seen as a leader. He was treated like a relic. Glorious, yes, but misplaced. Ferrari hadn't integrated him, they had displayed him. The dream had decayed. Behind the scenes, he navigated a web of political subtleties and shifting allegiances. The engineers he tried to inspire often deferred elsewhere. His teammate, emboldened by familiarity, began taking ownership of decisions that should have been shared. Hamilton was still contributing, still extracting everything from himself, but his influence was gradually being diluted, his presence increasingly ornamental. Those observing closely could detect the shift. His tone in interviews became more cautious, his laughter less frequent. The sparkle in his eye dulled beneath the weight of quiet disappointment. He wasn't bitter, he was exhausted. Not from racing, but from trying to belong somewhere that never truly made space for him. This was not the story he had envisioned when he signed with the Scuderia. He had imagined it differently, arriving as a titan, leading a renaissance, writing the final volume of his career in crimson and gold. Instead, he found himself drowning in structure, navigating egos, sidestepping tension. The very environment that was meant to unleash his remaining greatness had instead become a cage of expectations and misplaced priorities. He never said it aloud. But as the calendar ticked toward the summer stretch of the season, he stopped pretending. He began taking mental steps away from the project. Emotionally, he was retreating. Every handshake became heavier. Every press duty, colder. He fulfilled his obligations with professionalism, but the passion, the core that once burned for this challenge, had been quietly extinguished. What the media didn't know, what fans cheering from grandstands couldn't guess, was that long before the speculation began, Hamilton had already initiated conversations outside the Ferrari walls. It began as a simple reconnection, a friendly check-in, with the only person in Formula One who had ever truly understood the full scope of who he was, not just the athlete, but the thinker, the warrior, the architect of progress. Toto Wolff answered on the first ring. Their first exchange didn't mention contracts or comeback arcs. It was two individuals catching up, sharing space. But beneath the surface, something more powerful was stirring. Wolff, astute and deeply attuned to Hamilton's nuances, could sense the fracture without needing the details. The way Lewis spoke, not about racing, but about how he felt, said more than any race report ever could. The weeks that followed were a blur of silence and clarity. While the Ferrari garage grew colder, more fragmented, more distant, the warmth of familiarity began pulling Hamilton toward a possibility he hadn't dared revisit until now. The idea that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't supposed to end in red. After another emotionally draining weekend, another strategy misfire, another post-race silence between him and the pit wall, he made the call. Quiet, deliberate, untraceable. He arranged a meeting, not through agents or management, but personally. He didn't want filters. He wanted truth. He flew to Austria in the dead of night, bypassing speculation and skipping the media spotlight. In Vienna, tucked away in an office known only to a select few, he sat down with Wolff, not as a former driver, but as someone ready to redefine his narrative. They spoke, not as team principal and driver, but as two minds that had built something rare, something powerful, something real. Hamilton laid everything out. The growing disconnect. The mental fatigue. The moments of being sidelined. The unshakable feeling that he had given his trust to an institution that only ever wanted his image, not his insight. He spoke softly, but his words were razor sharp. He didn't ask for pity, he simply shared truth, stripped of pretense. Wolff didn't respond immediately. He let the weight of it all settle into the room. Then, without any dramatic overture, he offered the one thing Hamilton hadn't received in months: unconditional belief. "If you're ready," he said, "then so am I. Let's build the finale, not to prove anyone wrong, but to remind them who you are." It wasn't a pitch. It wasn't about revenge. It was about liberation. Hamilton wasn't looking for redemption. He was seeking alignment. A space where he could give fully, without walls. A team that didn't just use his name, but listened to his voice. And in that room, for the first time in over a year, he felt weightless. The decision wasn't scribbled onto paper that night. No announcement was typed. But something fundamental had shifted. The compass had turned. The future had begun writing itself anew. Not with vengeance, but with clarity. With purpose. With the hunger of a man who knew that the final act of a story wasn't about the trophies, it was about truth. He would finish the season. He would remain professional. He would continue driving with the excellence expected of him. But deep down, he had already crossed over. The prancing horse on his chest still gleamed, but in his heart, he had already started walking back toward the silver. Not to revisit the past, but to complete the journey. On his terms. After that deeply human and emotionally significant conversation between Lewis Hamilton and Toto Wolff, everything began to shift. Slowly at first, but with unstoppable momentum behind the scenes. The world remained unaware. The cameras were off. The reporters were gone. But in that sacred silence, the foundation of something monumental had begun to rebuild itself. Not a return to familiarity, but a reimagining of purpose. There were no traditional contract discussions filled with back-and-forth negotiations over branding rights or logistical clauses. This wasn't about marketing power or future media opportunities. It was about something infinitely more intimate, the reawakening of mutual trust, the healing of emotional fractures, and the silent promise that if this partnership were to begin again, it would be built on truth, not politics, not performance charts, not PR strategies. Truth. Mercedes didn't view Hamilton as a fading figure from their golden era. They didn't see a shadow of the driver he once was. They looked at him and saw clarity. They saw strength not diminished by time, but refined by experience. They recognized that what they lacked wasn't just performance, it was identity. And Lewis wasn't just a name on a contract. He was the compass they had once followed through chaos, and now desperately needed again. Hamilton returned to the conversation not as a desperate athlete looking for redemption, but as a man who understood his worth. He came not to be celebrated, but to be respected. He didn't ask for guarantees or symbolic gestures. He required only one thing: to be embraced as a genuine equal, unconditionally, without manipulation, without hidden agendas. He made it clear that he would not tolerate whispers behind closed doors, biased strategic decisions, or favoritism disguised as teamwork. He was willing to fight, but only if the battlefield was fair. Toto didn't blink. He didn't hesitate. He didn't respond with corporate language or diplomatic phrasing. He gave his word and his full support. There were no negotiations about that one demand. It was understood on a level deeper than language. The same man who once fought for Lewis in high-stakes meetings, who defended him during controversy, who stood beside him in victory and stood in front of him during criticism, he was still there. Steady. Unwavering. The details were finalized in total secrecy. A few quiet days. Confidential meetings. Discreet calls at odd hours. The kind of process that happens not with headlines, but with handshakes. Very few within the organization even knew what was unfolding. This wasn't about control. It was about protection, of the fragile trust being carefully restored. And both men agreed, no one would speak of it until Lewis decided the world could hear. That time came today, August 8th. He didn't organize a press conference. He didn't notify his management to prepare a rollout strategy. Instead, he did what only he could do. He told his truth. Pure. Honest. Personal. He posted a single photo. A muted, reflective image. A side profile. His eyes looking out into the distance. No racing suit. No logos. No colors. Just presence. Just power. The caption was sparse in words but overwhelming in impact. To the people who still saw me when others stopped paying attention, thank you. You reminded me who I am. It was subtle, yet thunderous. A thank you directed at those who hadn't abandoned him. A nod to the ones who looked past lap times, past rumors, past political shifts in the sport, and simply remembered the person beneath the helmet. He continued with a message that pierced the heart of every fan who had stood in his corner during the most uncertain stretch of his journey. You didn't follow results. You followed something deeper. And I felt that, even in the silence. These weren't just expressions of gratitude. They were acknowledgments of loyalty, of connection, of real support in a world where loyalty is often shallow and short-lived. His words were for the ones who still believed in the man, even when the machine seemed to have turned against him. And then came the sentence that changed everything. It was never the car. It was what stood behind it. The looks that said nothing. The rooms that grew colder. The refusal to speak when it mattered most. Respect isn't a color, it's a culture. It was precise, devastating, and profoundly honest. He didn't need to call out Ferrari by name. He didn't have to. The truth echoed louder than any logo. Hamilton exposed the deeper reason why things had failed. Not performance, not mechanics, but absence. Absence of voice. Absence of unity. Absence of warmth. The paint on the car wasn't the betrayal, it was the silence behind it, the lack of fight from those who should have stood beside him when it mattered most. With those words, he redefined what respect means in elite sport. Not applause. Not headlines. But actions in the quiet moments. Support when no one is watching. Defending someone's worth when there's nothing to gain. And in doing so, he pulled the curtain back on a culture that often confuses heritage with honor. Within minutes, the internet caught fire. The image spread across platforms like a spark in a dry forest. Fans flooded comment sections. Fellow athletes shared it. Artists and activists quoted it. The racing world didn't just react. They felt it. There were no gimmicks, no slogans, just truth. And the emotional wave it created was undeniable. He hadn't returned to prove anything. He had returned because it was finally safe to be himself again. He hadn't come back seeking validation. He had come back because the door was now open, not to the garage, but to genuine belonging. And while pundits scramble to define what this comeback means, Hamilton's silence speaks louder than any spin. This isn't about legacy maintenance. This is about soul reclamation. This isn't about chasing another championship. This is about finishing a story he never stopped writing, even when the world stopped reading. He's not just racing again. He's living again. And this time, every lap will carry the full weight of everything he's fought for, not just on track, but in the silence between races, in the heartbreak between seasons, and in the quiet dignity of a man who never gave up on himself, even when others did. He concluded his message not with words of fanfare, but with an image steeped in memory, weight, and intention. Quiet, almost cinematic in its simplicity, the photograph showed his first Mercedes racing suit suspended inside a softly lit, almost sacred-looking workspace. Time had left its mark on the fabric, the slightly faded colors, the worn creases, the echo of battles fought and won. There was no spotlight, no crowd, no podium, just the essence of legacy, waiting patiently in the shadows. Beneath the image, the caption spoke with restrained clarity, "Coming home. 2026. Let's finish this right." It was the kind of post that doesn't just trend. It ignites. It doesn't ask for attention, it commands it. Within seconds of its appearance online, every corner of the digital universe reacted as if a long-dormant giant had awakened. Fans reposted it with reverence. Comment sections filled with tearful emojis, thunderstruck disbelief, and emotional tributes. Race analysts, podcasters, and broadcasters halted their usual content to pivot instantly toward dissecting the message. Something monumental had just been set in motion, not only in the sport, but in the hearts of millions. Mercedes wasted no time confirming what many initially thought might be a cryptic nod or symbolic gesture. Their response was elegant in its restraint, a single post, a brief statement, almost poetic in its delivery. "He never truly left us." Attached to it was a soft-lit video clip of his original helmet being delicately placed on a modern chassis, blending the past with the future. No speech, no interview, no overproduced video. Just resonance. Just history echoing forward. And yet, from Ferrari, nothing. No message of gratitude, no farewell quote, no visual tribute. As the news spread and emotion poured from every screen, the silence from Maranello became deafening. It was a silence that suggested more than oversight. It spoke of disconnect, perhaps regret, perhaps defiance. Some interpreted the absence of acknowledgement as corporate pride, others as embarrassment, and many as confirmation of the tension that had been simmering beneath the surface long before the split became public. What's happening here goes far beyond team transfers or contract negotiations. It transcends salary figures and performance metrics. This isn't merely a driver switching teams. It's a man choosing to reclaim a part of himself that had been gradually stripped away. Lewis Hamilton is not rejoining Mercedes for nostalgia. He's returning for peace, for clarity, for purpose. Not to relive the past, but to correct the course of a story that took a turn away from authenticity. His time at Ferrari, though filled with hope and expectations, reportedly became a chapter filled with compromises he was no longer willing to make. Those close to the situation have spoken of creative tension, stifled communication, a clash of cultures. Hamilton, who had grown into more than an athlete, who had become a global symbol of empowerment, representation, and transparency, found himself in an environment that valued legacy but resisted evolution. The red suit may have looked iconic, but beneath it, his voice was muted, his influence diluted. Inside Mercedes, the story is different. There, he isn't just seen as a driver. He is respected as a force, a leader, a collaborator, a pioneer. His instincts on the track are matched by his insight off it. His values are not questioned, they are embraced. Returning to that garage, to that team, to those people who once formed the most dominant partnership in motorsport history, is more than a comeback. It's a reunion between a man and the version of himself that always belonged. Team members at Brackley reportedly received the news with raw emotion. Engineers who worked with him during the peak of Mercedes' dominance shared knowing glances. New recruits, some too young to have seen his early title runs live, felt the electricity in the air. This wasn't just a personnel announcement. It was the return of an identity. A signal that the team was no longer just rebuilding, it was reawakening. The implications across the sport are massive. Hamilton's return to Mercedes, especially timed with the dramatic regulatory overhaul slated for 2026, places him at the epicenter of a generational shift. He's not merely stepping into a new car, he's stepping into a leadership role that could define the next era of the sport. With the landscape about to change dramatically in terms of power units, aerodynamics, and technology, his presence brings not only experience, but credibility, stability, and inspiration. Commercially, the ripple effects are already visible. Apparel companies have ramped up production. Streaming services are repackaging content libraries. Broadcast networks are adjusting marketing calendars. The anticipation surrounding the 2026 season has skyrocketed. Tickets for Grand Prix weekends are surging in demand. Hamilton's brand value, already unmatched, has expanded exponentially with just one image and one sentence. Because what people are buying isn't just merchandise, they're buying into meaning. Even within the paddock, competitors are feeling the shift. Fellow drivers, some rivals, others friends, are reportedly reassessing their own long-term plans. Hamilton's decision to return has cast a fresh light on loyalty, leadership, and the cost of compromising personal integrity for institutional demands. It's not just a contractual move. It's a challenge, subtle but powerful, to everyone else. Know who you are and know what you're worth. As for Hamilton, his motives remain clear to those who followed his journey closely. He is not obsessed with one more title. He is not chasing a final record. He is not attempting to silence critics. His motivation lies in finishing a story with intention, with clarity, with a sense of truth that cannot be dictated by strategy boards or marketing agendas. He is here to lead, to inspire, to finish not because he has to, but because it matters to him. And that intention resonates far beyond pit walls and podiums. It reaches the fans who saw themselves in his rise. It touches the activists who found strength in his voice. It inspires the dreamers who learned from his resilience. In every way that counts, Hamilton is re-entering the arena not just as a competitor, but as a statement. The return is not about reclaiming a crown. It's about preserving a soul. It's about ensuring that the man who changed the face of Formula One gets to write his conclusion with the same bold, unapologetic conviction that defined his ascent. And that, above all, is why this moment has captivated the world. There are no guarantees in motorsport. No easy wins. No predictable paths. But what is certain now, more than ever, is that Lewis Hamilton will race again on his own terms, in a machine built not just for speed, but for freedom. And when the lights go out in 2026, the world won't just be watching him drive. They'll be witnessing him finish what he started, with dignity, with purpose, and with fire that never faded.